I make one video calling out all ghost videos as fake and everybody loses their mind. Okay, they didn't really lose their mind, but you get the point. Welcome back to the Least Professional channel on YouTube. How's everybody doing today? So nobody really lost their mind, but I made a video calling out ghost videos, and some of you guys, everybody seemed to really enjoy it, but I got a comment that I loved from True Dat that I wanted to use as a catalyst to kind of jump off on this video. I've been planning to make a few videos in a short little series here talking about ghost videos and why they're fake and how we can say they're fake and all that kind of stuff. So this video is going to be talking about the burden of proof. And I wanted to real quick go over the comment that I got from True Dat because it was really a good comment, and I really enjoyed the fact that they were willing to make a point that they made. So let me cover that real quick. I'm going to read that here. So they said, Josh, well, I kind of agree that I think that it's a difficult statement to either defend or disprove for that matter. I know that especially TikTok, everyone is faking for attention and it's just blaringly obvious. And a lot of YouTube are horrible about it. I'm looking at you, Omar Gosh. Which I didn't want to name any names, but I'll take it. But there are a couple of people who are honestly trying to show what they really found, and it's difficult to say whether it's definitely fake. And then they end with "love the videos, dude," and I appreciate that, and I loved that comment. And it kind of was one of those that sparked a little bit of a conversation, and it was one that I wanted to use for this because of how it makes a very good point. Trying to say that every single ghost video is fake, while acknowledging the fact that there could be real ones out there, kind of seems like it's counter to what you would think we should be talking about. And when I said that every ghost video was fake, what I was aiming at and going for was the burden of proof. So what is the burden of proof? Basically, whenever you go, especially if you look into it with court cases, is a really good way of, it's a lot of times used in court. But overall, the burden of proof is basically on whoever's making a claim to prove whatever claim they're making is true. So if it's in court, the burden of proof would lie on the prosecution to make, to prove that the defendant or whoever they're going after actually did the crime. When it comes to things like ghost videos, the burden of proof is on whoever uploaded a video saying that they thought that a ghost was in the video to prove that a ghost is actually in the video. Now, you might be thinking, how can they possibly prove that? They're uploading all the evidence that they have. And while that's true, they are uploading a video and they're saying that it's evidence. The problem lies in the fact that video, in this day and age, and in the way that it is, because of things like video editing software and the type of cameras that are out there and the fact that it's a very easy way to go viral, all of those things combined make it more likely that a video that is uploaded has been manipulated in some way or faked in some way. So it falls on the person that is uploading it to prove that it's actually real as opposed to fake before we should believe that it's actually real. So the default position, whenever somebody makes a claim, should be to not believe that claim. And there's a lot of different things that go into it that we'll kind of get into here as we go through. I've got a whole thing set up here, so as we go through all of that. But when somebody makes a claim, the default position should be not believing it. And depending on the claim, there has to be a certain amount of proof and evidence that's put forth before we should believe that claim. So the way I want to break this down is kind of explain it like this. When we're children, when we're babies, you're born, you're born not knowing anything. Basically, you're a blank slate. And as you grow up and you get into your younger years and then your school years, teenager, and then you get into your early adulthood, you are taught things throughout your time. And for the most part, especially as a child, you are taught things. You're basically taught to listen to your parents, and what your parents say, that is the truth, and that's the end of the line. Most parents, when they're teaching their kids, what I say goes. There's no debate, there's no argument, there's no explanation. I'm not going to give you a reason for it. And for a very young child, that makes that can make a little bit of sense, because young children especially they're not very good at understanding the world around them, and they need us to explain it to them. So for instance, if you have a 3 or 4 year old kid that, they're playing in the kitchen and you got the stove on and you don't want them to touch the top of the stove, you could do one of two things. You could either, and I think what a lot of parents will probably do would be to just tell the kids, don't touch that, or stay away from that. And they might throw in there, it's hot, you could get burnt. But even if they do, the kids, they don't have a frame of reference to understand why they shouldn't touch it. If you tell them you'll get burnt, they might not understand what that means. Getting burnt, not just an ouchie like it hurts, but getting burnt to the point where you can get some pretty bad burns on your hands, and you can be scarred, and there's a lot of things that go into that. But a little child doesn't understand that, and they don't necessarily need to. But the problem with this is that as a child is growing up, this is what they're taught, and this is how they understand it. Mom said something or dad said something, I need to listen to it because they said it. And that's the only reason they're given. And so as you grow up, it applies to things that aren't just necessarily dangerous for you. They're things that your parents don't want you doing because it might cause them problems. It's not necessarily always a life or death thing for a child. And so they spend their entire childhood growing up hearing this and thinking this. And so then when they become an adult, they're less likely to question the things that they've been taught growing up because it's been ingrained in them over years. So you wind up with a bunch of people that are young adults, or they get into their adulthood, and they've got all of these things that their parents have ingrained in them growing up, and they're just kind of stuck in those beliefs and those thoughts and processes and ways of doing things. And for most people, they wind up getting so ingrained in that stuff, they don't ever bother to question it. What's the reason behind this? Because they always go back to, well, mom said or dad said not to do this. I don't know why they said not to do it, but they said not to do it. And so when it comes to things like burden of proof, they don't grasp the idea of what they should be doing is looking at each individual belief and each individual thing and finding the reason behind it and challenging the reason behind it. So if you have a belief, and we'll go with ghosts because that's kind of where I've been going with this entire channel. If you have something that you believe in, like ghosts, and let's say you've grown up your entire childhood and your parents believed in ghosts and spirits and that kind of thing, and so you just kind of believed in it. And you never thought to question it. And anytime somebody came along with opposing information, maybe you got upset with them or angry with them. Or maybe you had your own experiences that you couldn't explain, and because you believed in ghosts already, you just attributed it to ghosts. And so anytime other information comes in that contradicts that or goes against that, you're less likely to believe it. You're less likely to even consider it as possibly good information because it's so ingrained. And as human beings, it's hard for us to switch directions once we have hit a point where we've believed something for such a long period of time. Challenging that belief, it's almost a self-preservation mechanism thing where we don't want to be wrong. And challenging a belief and challenging something that we've believed for a long time, maybe our entire life, potentially means that we could wind up being wrong about something. And nobody wants to be wrong because that somehow affects us or makes us a worse or a bad person because we were wrong about something. So, and I rambled a little bit longer than I want. That was a real short point that I had there talking about all of that stuff. I wanted to kind of get that out of the way so that I could get into this next point, which is why the burden of proof is important. As a whole, if we don't have a standard for what we believe in, then we're liable to fall for any number of things. And we're liable to believe in any number of things, even if those things could prove harmful to us or detrimental in some way to our well-being. So when it comes to burden of proof, the amount of proof that you need for something, or the amount of evidence that you need for something to sway a belief, depends on a bunch of different factors. One of the biggest factors is obviously because it's all based on internal thoughts and the way that, individual thinking. So a lot of it is based on how ingrained a belief is, how long you've believed something, and how deeply held that belief is going to directly correlate with exactly how much evidence it's going to take to sway your mind on whatever the subject happens to be. But it's not just how ingrained the belief is in your mind, it's also how much, what is at stake for that belief. So for instance, if I had a friend that, I told a friend of mine that I make $1 million a year, they might be skeptical, but at the end of the day, like, it doesn't really matter to them. It might when they come to ask me for money, but ultimately, like, how much I make doesn't impact them. But if I go to a bank and I claim that I make $1 million a year and I'm trying to get a loan, the bank's going to require some actual hard proof that I'd make that much money before they'll give me the loan, because they want to make sure that I can repay it, and they've got a lot on the line if I don't repay it. So the amount of proof that's required there greatly depends on how much it impacts that individual, whether it's my friend or the bank. And another way to look at this is that extraordinary claims, if I can get it out, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. So the bigger the claim, the more impactful it is on you personally, the more evidence it's going to take. And one of my favorite ways to kind of highlight this a little bit is if, for instance, if I came to you and I claimed that I have a serum that will cure every ailment in the world and will make it so that you live to be 200 years old, you would need to question that. You would need some hard evidence, hopefully. Ideally, you would need some hard evidence, some very, very high proof that the serum actually does this. Because if the serum doesn't do that and it winds up being a poison, you could die. Or if I'm charging a lot for the serum, you could be out a lot of money even if the serum has no negative effects. And this was something that back in the day, they used to have snake oil salesmen. And that's a term that's still kind of thrown around today. But the general idea behind it, where it became really popularized, and you see probably the most influence of it would have been the American Southwest, back in the early 19th century, early to mid 19th century, and even close into the 20th century, where these guys would go around and they were con artists, and they would say that they're doctors. They'd have a whole cart with tonics on it and everything, and they'd show up to a town and they would claim that they've got a miracle cure for anything that ails you. And they would normally have somebody in the crowd, which we call a shill, and that person in the crowd would stand up and say, "Yep, I took the medicine and it cured me of whatever ill effects," and get everybody all excited about it. And people would just believe it. They wouldn't question it. They would say, "Oh, this one person over here says that they had a great experience with it, so obviously it must be good." And so their burden of proof was way down here. And they would go up and a whole bunch of people would buy it all up. And then by the time that they realized that the tonic wasn't exactly as good as the guy was saying, he'd be long gone. He'd have left town already. Another great example of a con artist that got away with something major because people didn't question enough was a guy named George C. Parker. And back in the early 20th century, so the early 1900s, he was going around several different places, but especially like in New York, and he was selling people the Brooklyn Bridge. And he didn't own the Brooklyn Bridge, but he fabricated documents. And it wasn't just the Brooklyn Bridge. He was selling Madison Square Garden and the Statue of Liberty, as well as a couple other major things that he had no ownership over. But he was a con man, and he was able to do these, and he got away with it for a while, but he wound up going to jail and spending a good amount of time in jail and dying in jail. But the reason he got away with it was because people didn't have a high enough burden of proof when somebody made an extraordinary claim, such as, "Hey, I own the Brooklyn Bridge, and all you got to do is sign on the dotted line right here and pay me a set amount of money, and you can own the Brooklyn Bridge. It'll be all yours." And this wound up becoming a major issue and the police actually had to show up one day because there was a ton of people at the Brooklyn Bridge claiming that they owned it and that they wanted to set up a toll booth. So they were trying to make money after they bought this bridge from this guy that never owned it in the first place. So that's why burden of proof, you need to have a higher standard of evidence for things like that, because it's not always an obvious con. Looking back, those seem like really obvious cons. We might say, why would anybody believe somebody who just showed up in the middle of town with a cart claiming to be a doctor? Or why would anybody believe that somebody owned the Brooklyn Bridge or the Statue of Liberty? But the problem is that that's all in hindsight, and we know about that now. Nowadays, things are a lot different, and there's all kinds of people out there selling all kinds of different things that aren't necessarily always going to cost you money, but some of them will cost you money, and they wind up harming you financially. Sometimes you can get hurt physically, depending on the circumstances. So having that higher burden of proof and taking a very hard look at things before you do them and making sure that you're making the right decision is extremely important. And if you're going to apply it to your everyday life, you should apply it evenly to everything. And that includes beliefs about ghosts and whether or not ghosts are real and whether or not they're influencing us. So putting this into practice when it comes to ghost videos online, and going back to my all ghost videos are fake video. The burden of proof, like I said before, is on the person that's uploading the video and claiming to have caught a ghost. Now, some things to consider. Ghosts haven't been proven to exist. We don't have any kind of scientific evidence to back up the existence of ghosts. And since they haven't been proven to exist, we have a few things to consider. First and foremost, being that if you're not able to explain something, you can't then attribute it to something. So if you, for instance, you see an object move out of the corner of your eye, or you hear something falling in another room. The hell's that? That was awkward. Okay. Or hearing weird noises. Anytime that you have those kind of things come up, just because you can't explain them doesn't mean that you can attribute them to ghosts, because we don't have the evidence that ghosts exist. And part of that explanation goes into confirmation bias playing a big role when you are making a determination on whether something's real or not. So if you think that ghosts are real to begin with, and then you see a video and you can't explain that video, you're more likely to jump to ghosts. Something that you can do to kind of counter this, though, is try taking that same video, that same unexplained video that you aren't sure what happened in it, and applying an explanation other than ghosts to the video. So for instance, try to apply, fairies did it. Something happened that was weird. It was a fairy. Well, that doesn't make any sense. Maybe you believe in fairies, but again, they're very much like ghosts. There's no evidence. Even further, you could go and say, okay, well, maybe somebody had an invisibility cloak, like Harry Potter, and they were covered in the invisibility cloak, and they whispered something into the camera, or they moved something around, or did something, pulled on somebody or whatever. They did it all from an invisibility cloak. And then, you might say to me, Josh, that's crazy. There's no way that invisibility cloaks exist. But I would counter with, right, but we don't have any more evidence for ghosts than we have for invisibility cloaks. And you could plug in somebody in an invisibility cloak just as easily as you could plug in a ghost doing something. And you could even apply that to personal circumstances. If you've had something unexplained happen to you, you've had something weird happen. Maybe it was somebody in an invisibility cloak that was, that made a noise or did something that, just to mess with you because they had fun with it. And you can't disprove that any more than you can disprove ghosts. So how do you figure out which one it is? And what it boils down to is you can't. There's no way to disprove one or disprove the other. And because the burden of proof lies on whoever's making a claim, you have to judge, you have to look at that claim and you have to say, okay, I don't believe that claim. And maybe there's an alternate explanation, and for a lot of the ghost videos, you can look at them and you can figure out pretty easily that they were fake. But the ones that you can't figure out whether or not they're fake, because we don't have any evidence of ghosts, but we do have evidence of other things. For instance, pareidolia, which we've talked about before on the channel. When you have evidence of knowing that how the human brain works, and knowing that you're going to see and hear weird things sometimes, or that a breeze might have blown something over, or something might have just been like right on the edge of falling off and fell off from wherever you were at, whatever circumstance you're in. Like there's an explanation out there, and there's always a normal explanation for it. So by default, anytime that we see a video online, this is kind of covering why I said all ghost videos are faked. We should look at every single video as either it was intentionally faked, or it has an explanation that's grounded in reality. Sometimes somebody will upload a video of something that happened to them or occurred that they can't explain. And it's good to kind of try and work through what the possible explanations could be. And we can't always, you should never go right out and assume that they're trying to dupe you. Especially with something like if it's a ghost video, because what we talked about before, the stakes are pretty low. I mean, if the video actually had a real ghost in it, that would be world shattering, as far as like it would be absolute proof that there's life after death. But as a rule, generally, the stakes are pretty low. So don't start off thinking, okay, they're trying to dupe me. Especially if they're coming out, if they're starting off with, hey, I don't know what this was. So if they're saying, I don't know what this was, okay, let's take a step back. Let's take a look at the circumstances and try to figure it out. What could it have possibly been? Now, if they say outright that I think this was a ghost, that could be their confirmation bias, where they already believe in ghosts, something weird happened, so they're attributing it to ghosts. Or it could also be that they're legitimately just trying to get views. They're trying to get people to click on their video because I had a weird ghost encounter. A ghost did this to me. A ghost did that to me. So, look at it too from like what angle are they coming at it. Chances are a lot higher if somebody says, I think a ghost did this, that they're trying to get people to click on it. That's unfortunately the way it is in 2022 now. That's just the way that it is. That people inherently, like we discussed in the last video, they're trying to get views, they're trying to get attention, and so if they put in the title, caught ghost on camera or whatever, we have to default to, they're probably trying to dupe us. If they put in the title, I don't know what this is, somebody help me out, that's a little more believable that they're actually trying, because we know people have weird things happen that they can't explain, and especially with the internet, it's a lot easier to crowdsource these unexplained things. Like, I don't know what it is, I'm going to put the video out there and see if anybody else can figure it out. And I've seen that happen, whether it's on YouTube or I've seen a few on Reddit, where somebody will post a video up and they'll say, I'm not really sure what this could be. And people will respond with, well, maybe it was this or maybe it was that. And those kind of things, there's nothing wrong with them. It doesn't look like somebody trying to get, you have to kind of gauge that too, is what does it look like the person was trying to do? What's their motive behind this? Because motive kind of factors in when you're trying to figure out burden of proof. Like when you're trying to figure out the evidence, you got to kind of keep all of that in mind, especially with ghost videos. Remember that, the burden of proof lies on the person that's making the claim. If somebody uploads a video claiming that it's a ghost, or claiming that it's a demon, or a chupacabra, or a Bigfoot, or whatever they're claiming it is, we have to keep in mind the burden of proof is on them to prove the video's authenticity. And if they can't do that, we can't accept it as true. I think this one's probably a little bit shorter. I don't want to go too overboard on all of them. I want to make them as long as they need to be. But I wanted to get this one out. And thank you, TrueDat, again for your comment. I loved that comment. That was amazing. And I love it when people, I wouldn't say call me out or challenge me. I do love that stuff. If you disagree with me, if you think I'm wrong on something, definitely challenge me with it. But just the way they said it, they came at it and they were like, I'm not sure I think this, and it was great. We had a short little kind of conversation there. And that's the kind of stuff I love, and that's why you guys are one of the best audiences in the world. I love the kind of thoughtfulness that goes into your comments, and I appreciate them. There is another video for this little mini series that I'm working. You know, I kind of my plans overall over the next couple of months is to kind of get some things in line. I've got some bigger ideas for the channel that I'm working on, and going through, like, each month I want to kind of focus on a different aspect of things, and this month is kind of focusing on ghost videos and the validity of them and what we can learn from them and different things like that. So I've got some more things coming down the pipeline in regards to that kind of stuff. This was one of those, and I wanted to kind of put this together and get it out. So I want to thank you all for watching. Throw another video right up here, so go check that one out. And as always, have a great rest of your day, and I will see you in the next one.